Hi, I'm Maddie,
And I'm Abigail, and this is
two writers.
Many Wrongs. Two writers forcing people to be friends with us,
Truth.
just like I forced you. Today, we are talking about building our writing communities, how we have worked on that, and how we continue to work on that because it's really a never-ending process of making writer friends.
Yes, I never get more excited than when someone mentions that they write. Because like
Hmm.
I'll talk about I'm a writer and they're like, oh, I dabble a bit, and I was like, tell me more, tell me everything. You are now going to be my friend. I'm going to bring you into my community. Yes.
I, the people that I work with at the bookstore, like one or two of them have talked about, oh yeah, like I really enjoy writing. I'm like, great, come to my writing group. They're like, well, it's not that serious. I'm like, let's make it serious. Like, let's take this hobby and make it like a thing.
Yeah.
And I think I've scared a couple people off, but I've gotten a couple people to join.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Do you like, can you think of what your first writing community was?
My first writing community. I mean, so I kind of got the idea for the format of the community that we're in now
Hmm.
from there was a published author, I think, that did this kind of workshop thing, like very similar to what we do now.
Hmm.
But you had to pay like $200 a week or something to be a part of it.
Fuck, we're writers. We don't have $200 a week.
I know. I went like once or twice and I was like, I can't do this. I don't think it was that expensive.
Mm-mm.
Maybe it was like, but it was like
The
maybe
fact that
200
you have
bucks
to
a month.
pay to be a part of a community is crazy to me.
And I really liked the format though, because they would do that. They
Hmm.
would all do a check-in, everybody would talk about what they were working on, and then we would turn our cameras off and write for an hour and then say how it went. And I
Hmm.
really liked that, but I didn't like the bar. There was a bar to get up for entry,
How many people were in that group?
like 12, maybe.
Oh, okay. Wow,
Fairly
that
pricey.
person was making bank.
Yeah. Again, I don't remember how much it was, but it felt like $200.
Well, and again, I'm just saying any amount of money that creates that barrier. Um, I think that especially as young writers, there's already so many barriers up. It's just unnecessary to have them have to pay for things on top of that.
Yeah. And I think too, it was like offering the services of a published
Hmm.
author. Like you get to work with published author, and that was kind of the cool
Gotcha.
thing about it. But
Did they actually give you any kind of insight or anything helpful? Like, was there anything that warranted that money, or was it just a space to write?
it seemed more like a space to write. But again, I only went twice. So
Okay. We can't
I
judge
don't,
it unfairly.
yeah, I don't want to say like,
Hmm.
oh, she charged all this money and it was for nothing. I'm sure there,
Hmm.
like, if I had stayed, maybe there'd be opportunities for her to read my work. And
Hmm.
I couldn't justify the cost of it. And that was
Yeah,
the whole reason
I
I,
get that. Yeah. My excuse me, my first experience with like a writing group or writing community was at Florida State. They had the Williams Writing Workshop, which is somebody who used to have a speech impediment with my R's is like one of the worst things trying to say the Williams Writing Workshop. But it kind of, I don't know, it ended up being more like a book club where nobody actually reads the books and you just kind of go to talk. And I didn't get a lot of value out of it. And like it was cool being around other writers, but it's not like we sat and talked about our work. Like we literally had like a board game night and it was really trying to build the community, but it was trying to build it off of like regular socialization things instead of building it off of the thing that made us a
community.
unique, right, exactly. So it really wasn't until grad school that I felt like I started to have a community. And then post grad school, like nobody kept in touch, which is why I think it's amazing that you were able to form your, writing group in grad school. And then, I'm sure we're going to talk about other pieces of advice this episode, but my
Sure.
biggest piece of advice for building a writing community is to find somebody who is motivated like Maddie and just be a leech. Like I didn't let you go. I was like, I know this bitch has all this kind of stuff going for her. I know that she's brilliant. I know that she has friendships. I am going to worm my way into her life.
Wow.
You
Just wow.
know this. You know this already. And it
Yeah.
worked.
I feel like you think too highly of me. Like I feel like I've tricked you somehow.
No, no. I mean, we have how many people do we have in our writing group right now? I'm gonna say we have probably 7 active participants, and probably 10 to 11 total, you know, and the other ones kind of float in and out on occasion.
Yeah, yeah. Like probably like I'd say 10 that are pretty standard there
Hmm.
most of the time. Or if they're not there, they tell us they're not coming.
Right, exactly. Yeah. 10 that I'm going to say are like active participants, but then I know that we have some floaters around there too.
Yeah, for sure.
And that, I mean, it's just, it's, I'm going to say is a testament to you as a leader, and as a community builder, because you al- not just allow those people to latch on to you, but like actively encourage it, where you're like, yeah, come on, be my little writer friend. And, I think I've brought 2 people into the group and neither of them has consistently shown up. So there's always hope that they will. But I think that's one of the hardest things about building a writing community is getting people to show up.
100%. Um, I think it has a lot to, I think the community has survived because of the people in it. Like,
Hmm.
it's not, I'm so great, people stay. I think there are so many people that really care about writing and they show up,
Hmm.
and that helps keep the community alive. So even
Hmm.
if I was just constantly telling people, you guys need to show up, it's not going to work unless people show up.
Hmm. That's true.
It's those people coming to our writing group consistently all the time. There's been times when I've been really struggling and I wasn't able to go to writing group at all or do anything with the writing group, and it still survived, which just shows that it has a lot to do with the people that are in it, that we have the right
Hmm.
people in there that are passionate and care about
Yeah.
the right.
Well, I think the other thing that's wonderful about our writing group is it it is a very compassionate group of people. I feel like a lot of times in writer groups, there can be a lot of toxicity, especially like when it comes to competition, as far as who's getting published, who's finishing work, who's editing work. Um, and our group is really just very, very supportive of one another. We have members who show up and sometimes they write and sometimes they just read. I've come to sessions where I'm not in a great headspace, but I just want to be around you guys because you're so encouraging. And I'll sit with my computer off and just read a book and then check back in and see how everybody else is doing. And I think that is really what's important for building a strong foundation of writers. Anybody out there who's trying to build a writing community, yes, it's important to find people who want to write. So it's not that book club that nobody's actually reading the book, but it's also important to find people who want to encourage one another and aren't just there to try and prove something.
Right. Like, it's not a competition. We're not comparing ourselves like who wrote the most this week or who's
Hmm.
the most published or something like that. We talk to each other as human beings, and
Hmm.
knowing the struggles of a writer and knowing that there are ebbs and flows in creativity, and understanding that people sometimes, like, I just don't have it in me to write. But to me, it means so much that you show up to something like this, because it shows that you are interested and motivated and still in love with your craft, that you're making time for it even when you don't feel like you can do it. That's huge, because that's
Hmm.
part of the battle.
Hmm. Well, and especially, we talk about the idea of like not having it in us to write. And, I'm sure that lots of other, I don't want to say hobbies, lots of other creative pursuits can understand that. But when it comes to something like a career path, there are days that you're like, oh, I'm too tired. I don't really want to go to work. But you show up and you do it because you have to.
Right.
Whereas an artistic pursuit, like it takes something, at least personally, I don't want to speak to everybody, but it takes something out of me to write. So, especially because I've been working on the edits for my novel for so long, if I know a particularly difficult scene is coming up, I have to make sure that I have that emotional wherewithal to get through that scene and still have enough to live my life.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that that maybe gets misunderstood as like an excuse or some kind of laziness or something. Whereas when you have that community behind you to say, it's okay, you don't have to do it today, it can really help you get through that.
Right, because at the end of the day, even on the days you can't write, that doesn't make you any less of a writer. You're still a writer.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I think the way I treat it is I kind of talk to people in the writing group the way I wish somebody would talk to me, or how I wish I would talk to myself,
Hmm.
to give that person space and to understand that it's okay.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
it's just life.
Yeah, you and I joke all the time. We're very, very compassionate with other people and very mean to ourselves.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that having that community there to back you up and remind you that you also deserve compassion and you also deserve
Well,
time off is
well,
really useful. Because if I was sitting by myself, it would not go well.
yeah.
Ugh, yeah. Um, when I think about writing communities, like again, we talk about the narrative that writing is like this very, very isolating thing, but I remember, I don't know, probably in high school-ish, learning about like Fitzgerald and Hemingway and their little group of writers and
Yes.
thinking to myself, like, oh my God, that's amazing. Of course, now I think about it, I'm like, the toxic masculinity, fuck. No wonder Zelda lost her mind. Um, but
Real.
think right. But there's a history of writing communities and coming together to support one another's work.
Yes. I mean, again, not to romanticize that whole the
Yeah.
the lost generation, but I too is like I would love that to like sit with other writers in Paris and
Hmm.
talk about pretentious shit together. That sounds delightful.
Right, exactly. That sounds lovely. And I think, while I think that there's still a possibility for that, you still have people showing up to the bookstores, showing up to cafes with their laptops and writing.
Yeah.
It's not really the community. I think that the writing community has really moved online now.
Yes.
Um, which is, I mean, it's the only reason why our community continues to grow and thrive is because it's through Discord.
Right.
We have all of our different channels, we share ideas, we share inside jokes. um we just had one of the sweetest members of our community send out gifts to everybody. Did you get yours yet?
No, not yet.
Okay, I just got mine today. It's great. I won't ruin it for you. But like it is a community, but we all live hundreds of thousands of miles away from each other.
Yeah.
But we're able to have that community. And so I think that's one of the things that maybe people who are trying to build a community are struggling with. So if people didn't go to grad school, if people don't have that built-in physical community that then can expand online, where do you think people should look to find writing communities?
Um so I can't talk since I already had a writing community, but something I do is um I know that people sometimes can be a little secretive about writing.
Yes.
So when I meet other people who seem creative, that seem like really into that kind of stuff,
Hmm.
I'll drop like, oh, I'm working on my novel, and then
Hmm.
sometimes it'll get people to open up. So this is like an impersonal sort of thing. So if you have a job or something and you feel like this person's kind of creative, let me test the waters. And sometimes just having somebody else who writes, like that's exciting to meet somebody, and that's usually when I invite them. And so maybe that's
Hmm.
something you could do if you meet somebody else who writes and be like, hey, do you want to like maybe get together over coffee? We could start writing. And all you need is one person at the start
Hmm.
and and I think that you can grow it from there.
Hmm. Because I also think that everybody who has a secret writing ambition also has a friend that also has a secret writing ambition. And I feel like that's really, again, we had the jumping off point of the graduate program, but the two people that I have brought into writing group are just my friends who are like, oh yeah, I would love to write more. And I think that that's really the crux of it is the desire to write more.
Yes.
Because writing is seen as such like a casual thing. I think that there is a really big online community. I used to like have a relatively decent following, followers, whatever, on Twitter. Now I have not really gone on Twitter
Rip.
since it changed to X, right? Exactly. But before that, that's really where I was connecting with other writers, with people offering beta reader services. That's where I was connecting with different agents, seeing what they wanted, requested, were requesting right then. Um, I, since doing my blog, have been trying to break into the Instagram space, but have found it much more difficult to find. I mean, Instagram is much less interactive than Twitter was. Um, and weirdly, I'm part of a writing group on LinkedIn, which is where I've been sharing a lot of my stuff. And again, it's missing that level of interaction.
Mhm.
But Twitter was really where I found the most community outside of like our little group.
Yeah, I think as far as social medias are concerned, Twitter was always the place that writers were
Hmm.
at. But I too have stopped doing Twitter, which was such a shame because I too had built up a really great following
Hmm.
on there and had really good connections. But Instagram is just it's not the right venue for it.
Mm-mm.
Threads has started, but like it just seems so dead. And it's like I already did this with Twitter. I don't want to do this again. Like
Well, and I mean, it really is exhausting. Like when I think
yeah,
about, trying to build up that following again, like I worked really, really hard to build up my Twitter following. Um,
me too.
and to get that. And even then, I only had like 250 followers on Twitter. And like that was really, really, really trying. You had a lot more. Um, but it's too exhausting. And my Instagram has been going for about a year, and I think I only have like 100 or so followers. Um,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
it's very difficult. So I part of me wonders if TikTok is, the new place to go to find that writing community. Um, but I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, I don't know either. I know that there are writers on there, but I
Hmm.
feel like TikTok is more for books. Like if you have a
Yes.
book, like book talk is
Hmm.
huge.
Hmm.
But even if my book was if I
Hmm.
was in the process of publishing my book, which I'm not at that point
Hmm.
quite yet, I might kind of I'm writing a space opera, which I don't see that as much on there. It's more like
Hmm.
the romantasy, it seems to be really big,
Yeah.
and I'm that's not what I write. So I mean
Hmm.
that's totally fine if that's the kind of book you're trying to promote. But I feel like if you're not in that specific niche, it's you don't really get a lot of traction on there. Like I do TikTok,
Hmm.
um and steadily staying at 120 followers, and I usually get like
Hmm.
12 likes on my videos, which isn't, it's not terrible, but I'm not
Yeah.
going anywhere fast with it.
Well, I think the thing that social media um, lacks when trying to build a writing community is that back and forth, that interaction. It's the same thing that I have found with teaching my creative writing classes online versus teaching them in person. Is you can assign a discussion board, but it's not going to get the same feedback, the same back and forth as an in person where ideas are bouncing off one another in real time.
Hmm.
Um, and so, again, I think people trying to build their writing community, you can start in those social media platforms and find people who you kind of vibe with, maybe, but moving it to a platform like Discord, like doing the Zoom sessions like our group does, into a more real time personal space is what's going to make it stick, is how you're going to make your writing friends.
Right, exactly. Well, I had to look because I was curious. So I had 821 followers on Twitter.
Jesus, how long were you working on building that? Because I think I worked on my Twitter for maybe like a year, year and a half to get to the 200.
Let me see. I think I really started posting in like, uh, I don't want to lie to you. Hold on.
No, you're good.
Do, do, do.
I mean, honestly, I started focusing on all of my different social media after AWP, which I also want to talk about going to different conferences to build your community as well.
Hey,
Um,
I'll be there later this week.
yeah, yeah, I'm very jealous of you.
I think I started in like 2021, maybe.
Okay.
So it took me about a year.
Amazing. You're also um you're much more willing to put yourself out on the internet, whereas I'm very afraid of the internet because it's where mean girls live. Um, and
Oh,
so the
yes.
fact that you do your TikTok is so impressive to me. I'm terrified of posting something on TikTok.
I mean, I haven't gotten any hate comments,
Hmm.
but it does hurt my feelings when I work really hard on a video and like nobody likes it.
Hmm. Yeah, putting out this podcast to begin with is already like a huge social leap for me.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it
Look at you.
goes. But
Look
I
at
think
you.
I think even just putting yourself out there is how you build a writing community, you know, unless you are willing to stand up and say, "Hey, I'm a writer. This is what I'm working on." Nobody else is going to recognize that or step forward with you.
Sure.
I think that reading is a good way to start to find your writing community, because most writers are very avid readers. Um,
You
so
should be.
like right, exactly. So the bookstore that I work at, we have three different book clubs. We have a fiction, a fantasy, and a romance book club. And just going and sitting with other readers, you find out how many of them are secret writers, you know?
Mhm.
So finding those social situations can help build a following as well.
Yeah. I do think it's important to become friends with other writers, to reach out to other writers.
Hmm.
Because I know for a long time I thought that other writers were my competition,
Oh yeah.
but they're not.
Mm-mm. I think that that's something that um, is drilled into us a little bit of
Sure.
that competition there. You know, my husband and I joke that we could never be in the same field as one another. Like I would never want to date him if he was a writer. Um,
100%.
Right, because we would both just get way too competitive. And if I was, you know, a science medical person, he would have no interest in that, because we both have like a relatively competitive nature. So unlearning, oh, well, if, you know, the two of us are submitting to the same publication and you get published and I don't, you know, you took my spot. And it's like, well, that's not how
It's
that
not, it's
works.
not how it works at all. No.
No. And I think one of my favorite things with our writing group is, you know, you, me, and one other will message each other and be like, hey, let's all submit to this thing or let's all submit to this thing. And when I get my rejection letter, my first thought is, oh, I hope that Maddie got in. It's
Oh,
not, you know, oh, that fucking sucks and blah, blah, blah. Literally, my first thought is, I really hope that Maddie got it. Like, if it
yeah,
couldn't be me, I hope it's her.
exactly. I mean, that's exactly how I felt like when I would get it.
Hmm.
I'm like, oh, I hope Abigail got it. I hope she got it.
Yeah.
But
And then we text each other, and both of us are like, meh, meh, rejection.
yeah, yeah.
One of these days, we're going to get accepted.
I'm really, really excited. I remember
Yeah.
when you told me that story you're getting published in a couple months.
Hmm.
You told me that you texted me, telling me you got it published.
Hmm.
I literally was like a maniac. I was dancing around my room. I'm like, Josh, did you hear?
Oh,
Abigail got published. I'm so excited for her.
that's so sweet. You're so sweet. I love it.
But
But yeah, I
but
mean, that's
that's part
how
of
I,
community.
right. Exactly. Exactly. And so letting go of that pompousness of, you know,
It's so much better
it's so much better.
because
And I,
what you're doing is you're letting more joy in. Because not
hmm,
only do I get to take joy in my accomplishments, I get to
hmm,
take joy in everybody's accomplishments.
hmm,
And it feels the same. Like it feels like that same level of joy because it's like you are now a part of me because we're in a community together. So when you
hmm,
get success, it's like I got success,
yeah.
like by proxy.
Hmm. Like as white women specifically, we have been taught by society, if somebody else gets something, you have less. And like that has been an unlearning process, at least I know for me. And I think especially with me growing up in such close proximity to the queer community and having so many people in my life who are part of that community, learning that everyone gets to build on each other and like we are stronger together, than we are individually. I feel like there are so many things within the writer community that are founded on like shitty white men. Like you and I talked about, the first writing group we heard about was, Fitzgerald and Hemingway, shitty white men. And I feel like that has been
Shittiest.
right. I feel like that has been ingrained in the writing community to some aspect of like that competition rather than other marginalized communities who realize if one succeeds, they all succeed. And I feel like that's something that you and I have worked really, really hard on building, to remember if one person in our group succeeds, all of us succeed. All of us get to be a part of that celebration.
Right.
Um, I don't know if that's useful, but I feel like that was my little soapbox rant.
I feel like that's incredibly useful because it's something to point out too, because it's part of the greater writing community, not necessarily like a smaller writing
Hmm.
community, but as a bigger writing community, we need
Hmm.
to acknowledge the things that established our original writing community and how toxic and wrong those are and
Hmm.
help cut them out. And the way we can do that is by showing everybody there's a better way
Yeah.
and that there is room for everyone at the table. Like
Hmm.
there should be no like you're not allowed. Everybody should have an equal opportunity and some people should have more of an opportunity because they've never had the opportunity in the
Hell
first
yeah.
place.
Yeah.
So, I think that's important too.
Yeah, well, and even before we started recording, you were talking about when you buy books, you prioritize buying female or BIPOC authors.
Yes.
And I think that that's a really important thing as well to build a larger community outside of ourselves.
Right,
Um,
because my whole thing is like I've read so many books by white men. I
mhm.
just want to know what other people have to say.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, and I feel like in my contemporary fiction space that I write in, there are a lot of female voices. Jodi Picoult is probably my hands down favorite author, and I absolutely adore her. But one of the reasons I adore her is because she does so much research and takes so much care when talking about marginalized communities, and is so supportive of marginalized communities within that genre, that it has led me to reading more diverse authors in that community as well. And I think that that's just it's important to acknowledge. When trying to build your community, to build it with diversity, with conscious diversity.
yes, yes. I think that it does not diminish you in any way to acknowledge the accomplishments of other people or promote
Hmm.
another artist or author. And like I recently did a TikTok about this author who I read him Justin C. Key. I read him in a magazine and a short story. I really loved it. And then I went to the bookstore years later and I saw he had published his first collection. And I was
Aw.
so excited because he responded to me on Twitter when I told him I really liked a short story. So I
Hmm.
immediately made a TikTok about it and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. And he commented on my TikTok and he's like, I'm so happy that you're all on this journey with me. And that just
Hmm.
felt so cool because it's like, yes, you're right. We are on this journey together because we're having a
Hmm.
conversation just by me like reading your work.
Hmm. One of the
So
things
freaking
that's been
cool.
really, yeah, I would say one of the things that's been really cool about working at the bookstore is we will have these author events where they'll do readings or signings or whatever. Um, And the debut authors that we have are always my favorite because, so we had Vanessa Montalban, who she just had her debut novel, A Tall Dark Trouble, which is a really good YA, fantasy magic. But when she did her reading, the woman who did the Q&A with her, they came up together. And it was so cute to watch them supporting one another.
Aw.
Isabella is the other author's name. um and it's one of those things where you look at like groups of actors that all came up together and are all buddies and all that kind of stuff, and it's the same thing in the writing world. You're gonna have people who are on the same rate of success as you and will have the same number of missteps as you, and like watching them celebrate one another was just really, it was really lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think too, like, I know we haven't talked about rejection yet, but we will. And
Hmm.
rejection is part of being a writer. But
Hmm.
it is so much nicer to be in a community where I can text you and be like, I got a rejection.
Yep.
And then you're like, so Taco Bell tonight? And
Yep.
it's just a little bit that helps make those harder moments because you're with somebody who relates to you, who's
Hmm.
going through the same struggles as you, and you can kind of lean on each other and support each other through that. So that's really nice to have people who are going through the same thing. Like soon, I think we're going to start querying our novel around the same
Hmm.
time, and
Yeah.
we're going to have each other through those trenches too. And I think that's invaluable.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think
Well,
I'd survive without you.
no, I agree. And to have the other person in our writing group who has already gone through some of that and to have his insight into it is also, extremely helpful as well.
Yeah.
The other thing, having people who understand the journey that you're going through, but also having people who aren't uh I don't want to say like are going to pamper you, but like the first time I got rejected from the Tin House workshop, my mom felt so bad for me. She like went out and bought me a bunch of shit and was like, I just want to make you happy. And trying to explain to her, like, I really, really appreciate that, but also it's just kind of a part of this, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and same thing with my husband, like such a supportive person,
Oh yeah.
but sometimes you need that person in the writing community to say, all right, so get the fuck over it. Like, let's move on. Where are you submitting next? Let's keep moving forward. And who isn't going to allow you to wallow, but also still understands that struggle. So it's not a callous thing, but
No.
it's all right, so you get Taco Bell tonight, and then you look up a new journal to submit to tomorrow
Yep.
kind of thing. And I feel like that's really important because the people in my life, I mean, my number one supporters are my mother and my husband, but they don't have the same level of understanding of what it feels like to have that story rejected,
Yeah.
that you do or the people in our writing group do.
Right. Like I can't tell my mom when I get rejected because my mom is literally like, I just don't understand. Why haven't you been published yet? And I'm just like,
Oh, right. It's the aggressive support of like, you're amazing. Why aren't they doing this? Yeah.
where my husband has a better
Hmm.
angle when he does it because he'll say that's just how this works. Like you just need to find the
Hmm.
right person at the right time. It's not, you just don't know it. You'll never know if you stop trying. So
Yeah.
he's very supportive in that way. But
Yeah, that's really nice. Every time that like I complain about some pregnancy aspect, Michael will say, "Yeah, that's how it's supposed to be." And I'm like, "That's not helpful. I'm aware of that."
yeah, and I bet, it feels a little like,
Yeah.
well, I'm doing all the work here. Like,
Sometimes, not often really. But it's the same thing with the writing of my mom will say, I really, really loved that story. Why did that story never get published? And it's like, I don't know. I can't answer that question. I've rewritten it 6 times. Nobody likes it the way you do, which is, I mean, I love, like, my mom is my number one reader. She's my number one editor. Um, but like sometimes she'll be like, "Oh my God, I love this so much." And I'm like, "I do too, but we're the only ones. It has to change."
I mean, it's just, I think community is great for
Hmm.
audience too, because
Hmm.
the crazy thing about what we do, again, I shouldn't say crazy, I apologize. The thing about writing is it's solitary, so we don't really
Hmm.
know if anything in our story that we're writing resonates with anybody at all because we
Hmm.
don't have an audience to give it to. But having community allows you to give it to some people who will read it and provide you feedback, and then you'll be like, "Oh, okay. So I'm not just talking to a void. There is something here that's salvageable." Because you don't know,
Hmm.
like, should I set this on fire and like never look at it again?
Hmm.
Or should I rework it? Or is it I just haven't found the right venue for it yet?
Right. And I find that people who don't have that writing experience, if you give them something, they will just say, like, "Oh my gosh, I can't, like, it's amazing that you wrote this." And it's like, well, I appreciate that, but I need some kind of helpful feedback. So, like, when I do my workshops in my writing classes, um, because they are, young undergrads, like typically I have sophomores, maybe some juniors, but a lot of times the feedback that they give is, oh, well, I didn't really like this, or oh, I really did like this, which isn't helpful, really. And as you mature within the writing community, you can realize, well, this isn't for me. I'm not the target audience for this. However, I know what good writing is, and I know how I can help this fellow writer get to a
Yeah.
better place. Rather than rewrite it so that it's for me, I can help them rewrite it to reach their actual target audience. And I think that
Yes.
that's something that comes with time and with practice and with maturity. And you're never going to get there if you don't have that community to bounce ideas off of. If you're only sitting there writing for yourself and not hearing from a larger voice and a larger community, you're never going to learn, really.
Yeah, I think that's the difference between feedback that you get is really
Hmm.
cool to see because I have some people when they'll read my stuff, they'll say, "Hey, I know what you were trying to do here. It's
Hmm.
not you're not accomplishing it, but
Hmm.
here's something you could do to make that happen." And it's really cool to see somebody who understands like the mechanics behind it. They're not like, I didn't like that character." They're like, "Oh, I see what you're trying to do with this character. But it's not quite landing the way you have it. But I think if you make a little adjustment here and there, you'll stick the landing better."
Hmm.
And so you get that kind of mechanical feedback that is so
Yeah.
invaluable. That also that they could like read your work and be like, "Oh, that's I love that you're doing that. It's not quite there, but let's get it. I know you're so
Hmm.
close. Let's do it." And
Yeah.
that really helps too because you feel like, "Oh, I'm able to communicate on a page. It's clear what my intentions are."
Hmm. I also want to talk about briefly different aspects of community. So you have like the primary writing community, who are the people who you can bounce ideas off of, the people who you can trust when you get rejected, the people who you can celebrate with when you get accepted, all the rest of it. And then I feel like the next tier out are those kind of like I call them my beta readers. They're not in my direct writing community because maybe they are not as active in their writing journey, or they have their own writing community, but it's somebody who is familiar with writing, but not necessarily familiar with my work. So when I beta read my novels, those are the people I look for. And specifically, I look for people who will understand what concepts I'm trying to talk about in my novel. So like in my first novel, one of my characters plays D&D, and two of my beta readers were older women who knew nothing about it. So at one point I said, oh, he rolled a nat 20. And I'll get notes being like, what is this? I don't explain. And it's like, well, you're not my target audience. And so I feel like there's that second tier of beta readers within the community. And then outside of that is the third tier of, if I post on social media, they're gonna like, support, share, whatever. We don't share each other's work. We don't necessarily interact that often, but can still boost one another socially. Um, and I feel like when you're trying to build a community, you might feel like you only have that third tier, but it takes work to take those third tier people and build them into the second tier or the first tier. So I don't
Mhm.
want people to get discouraged if they're just in that very like um, parasocial community right now.
Parasocial community.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have a wonderful community right now, but it didn't start the way it does now. It was
Hmm.
kinda like pulling teeth to get people to show up, and so it takes time, so just be patient with
Hmm.
the community building and be patient with the people in it and be respectful of their time because they're committing part of their lives to this, and that's huge. So giving space for, I need to take a month off or something
Hmm.
is really good, but just be patient. It's a long, arduous process, and again, this community that I have now, it's we've had it for 4 years, so it's pretty well established, but in the beginning, it was, uh, every month that we survived to be like, "Oh, I can't believe we made another month." I was
Hmm.
thinking this'll be the last month of it,
Yeah.
but, you know
How I have two different questions here. The first one is, how did you um continue to tread water with this group until it got more established? Because I feel like I came in pretty, not late in the game, but later, and hearing about, you guys tried basically any way to connect. You had the writing group, you had a book club, you had, pet discourses, whatever. I mean, it's really just about finding common ground. Yeah.
Yeah, I think finding I think one thing that's really important is when you're doing a writing community or any kind of community, I think if you get any type of group of people together to do a thing, someone has to step up and be the leader.
Hmm.
And that role fell to me. And it not necessarily like, oh yes, I love the power of
Yeah.
controlling these people, but it was like somebody needs to like set times, set
Hmm.
dates, chase people down for things. And so as the leader, that was something that I would do is I would personally reach out to people when they wouldn't respond in the Discord. So I would email them or text them
Hmm.
personally to, and people like that personal touch too, because it makes them feel like, oh, you specifically want me in the group. And
Hmm.
it's yes, silly, but I think taking those that's a good way to tread water is just know that it's a lot of work up front and that if you're the one running the community, you're gonna have to put in that extra effort because you need to prove that you're willing to make this work because nobody wants to take that responsibility. So
Hmm.
if you're not there pulling the strings and setting things up and doing calendar dates and planning stuff, nobody's gonna want to join your group. So you have to put the work in and chase people down to show that you're committed to this and people are more likely to follow you if they see and join your group if you show that you are willing to put in whatever it takes to keep it going.
Yeah. And I feel like, anytime that you are unable to show up to writing group, I tend to be the one to take charge. Just because I think that you and I are both kind of, natural leaders, whatever, in that way
Bossy.
of, yeah, basically. I have a very low tolerance for nonsense. And so if our
Really?
group, if our group had it their way, they would just sit and talk about life for half an hour and then write
Yes.
for maybe 15 minutes. And so I feel like it really takes, like, again, if you don't show up to writing group, I'm the one who starts with a, so what are you working on this hour? What are you working on this week? What are our goals? What are, and getting that conversation started.
Yeah.
And so it really is, if you're committed to building a writing group, you have to be willing to step up and be the bossy one.
Yeah.
Um,
You kind of have to maybe a little bit be the villain. Like you're the
mhm,
teacher like, "All right, everybody, come on. It's time to get to
mhm,
class."
yeah.
Because otherwise it does kind of derail. And
Mhm,
even when it's just a social hour, which is nice, people are
mhm,
less likely to attend
mhm,
because they're like, oh, we're just going to talk. I don't really need to be there for that. But if it's like,
right.
oh, I'm showing up, we're going to get writing done.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I also think that that's part of learning to prioritize your writing, especially when you start out writing. It feels like such a hobby. And if you ever want it to be more than that, you have to learn to prioritize it. It's a skill that needs to be
Yes.
practiced consistently. And so for me, having the writing group there, it gives me permission to put that time aside to focus on my writing that I
Yes.
wouldn't give myself if I didn't have a community counting on me. Nobody's actually counting on me, but that's what it feels like because we're all keeping each other in check.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
My other question was going to be, how did you go about finding beta readers? Because I know that you just started your beta for your novel. How did you find those people, either within or outside of your community, to do that for you?
So I'm doing a very, very small beta right now just
Hmm.
to get like initial thoughts. And I really wanted to make sure that this was a group of people that I really trusted. So one of my beta readers is my husband.
Yep.
Um, I'm not going to go into how I found him, but he's one of my biggest supporters, so I wanted to
Hmm.
include him.
Long story
But
short, he's awesome.
he's amazing. Yes.
Yeah.
Um, the other person in my group that's directly related to me is my cousin,
Hmm.
who he also writes.
Hmm.
Um, and he's been he's been working on a novel too. And I first connected with him like we were always really close, but I first with him again like in I don't know, when I started work like 2015 or something when I was really
Hmm.
working on this novel originally. And we would send chapters of our novels every time we'd finish it back and forth and
Aw.
write like huge pages of like what was working, what wasn't working, and then just
Hmm.
kind of like I cannot stress enough how much I need to read the next chapter. And so I really I really trust his advice because he gets me so much
Mhm.
We always make a joke that like we're each other like from a parallel universe, we're the same person.
Yeah.
So we're very much inside each other's heads. So he understands my work more than anybody.
Aw.
So and I want him to be able to read it now that it's more polished and get his feedback kind of seeing because he was there from the very
Mhm.
beginning. So it's important that
Mhm.
he saw this. All those reasons. The other two people that I included, because I'm only have four people, one, she was my main editor when I was a technical writer, and no one wordsmiths quite like her. She just has such a beautiful grasp of the English language. She's also a huge reader, so I thought she would be great to take a look at it.
Mhm.
And then the other one that I got is a friend of mine, and both of these girls have a podcast in which they talk about
Aw.
books and
Mhm.
the books that they enjoy. And so I thought that would be really fun because they're always talking about books and characters and um, the the other girl that's working on it, she also writes and she
Mhm.
dreams of one day working in the publishing industry as an editor. And she's very bookish. She loves books. She's also a bit of a hater, which I wanted to have at least one hater in my group because
Mhm.
I really want her to like give me her hot takes because I know she's not the kind of person who's gonna be like, oh, I liked it. She's gonna be like, what is this? Why did you write this? And I need at least one person
Mhm.
that's not gonna flatter me. And I know
Mhm.
she won't do it. Out
Yeah.
of love. Like she's
No, of course. Yeah. I mean, but that's the thing. I think that, when we're talking about the feedback and the competition and all the rest of it, like you don't have to be sunshine, cheery, supportive all the time. That's not actually helping the other people in your community grow. Knowing when there's a time for harsher constructive feedback is a skill that you learn as you
oh yeah.
continue to grow as a community and get to know each other better. I want to end with some kind of like hope of how to build a community. And for people who don't have a built-in community, whether it's at their college or at their job or whatever, putting yourself in situations where you're going to meet other creatives in person, going to book clubs, going to your library's writing events, sitting in a cafe and seeing if any other regulars go in there. But putting yourself in positions where you might be out of your comfort zone, which is hard for a lot of writers. A lot of us are very, you know, um, introverted creatures. So
Yes.
putting yourself in those situations, and the same thing with if you're going to build it online, putting yourself out there, putting your writing out there, sharing, retweeting, commenting your opinions, bolstering other people, putting yourself out there is the only way that you're going to grow a community. Even in our case where I was alone and latched onto you, I was never going to grow within that community if I wasn't willing to share with the other people in the group. If I
Yeah.
just, clung on to you and wanted you all to myself and whatever other kind of weirdness, like that would never work.
True.
Um, Using you to get to the bigger writing community and then putting myself out there and commenting and reading other people's work and giving feedback and posting my own work to get feedback. It's the only way you're really going to be able to build that community, I feel.
Yeah, there are resources online too that you can check out. Like
Mhm.
Poets and Writers is a good no, pw.org. They have places where you can look for communities around you. So they have like a little search engine for that.
Mhm.
AWP is also a great place.
Mhm.
They have information that you can connect to people through AWP. There's
Mhm.
NaNoWriMo and
Mhm.
you can join like specifically, which is National Novel Writing Month. You can use it
Mhm.
all year round, but they have groups for like your city that you're in, etc. And you can form like an online community Discord. You can also search on there for writing groups because there are other writing groups that aren't ours that you can totally just find and join. So if you're
Mhm.
more comfortable that way.
And
Um,
even just looking up local like writing conventions and things like that. Like I know, there are tons that take place all over our state that are much smaller than something like AWP.
yeah, right. But the AWP can be virtual too. So if you're more
Hmm.
comfortable doing
Right.
something online, if you're a little scared to go meet people, that's the way you
Hmm.
can do it. One way that I got some writer friends is I would take like a writing like book, like a book that's on writing on craft
Hmm.
at my job, and I would sit it on my desk on the end. And so sometimes people be like, "Oh, I love the Wonder Book. I also write." And I was like, "Great. Would you like to write with me sometime?" And so it's a little bit of a trap, but like,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
connecting with people through that way. So if you're allowed to
Hmm.
have books out on your desk, I'd recommend grabbing some book on craft, and you'll catch people that way.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. Do you have like a favorite book on craft? Is Wonder Book your favorite?
I do love Wonder Book, but I would say my actual favorite book is I got this book when I was in undergrad. It's
Hmm.
called Beginnings, Middles, and Ends
Ooh.
by Nancy Kress, and it basically just kind of goes through the beginning of a book, the middle of a book, and the end, and kind of the format of each of those specific parts.
Hmm.
And I like when things are like broken up into smaller chunks. So like let's just look on how to create a successful beginning in a novel
Hmm.
and then moving on. And I this has been a very invaluable book for me. It is kind of in a rough state, and there's so many highlighted pieces in here, but I absolutely huge fan of this one.
Nice. I'll have to
What
look into
about
that.
you?
I really love Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott.
Oh,
I find it to be
classic.
really right. It's a classic. I find it to be really helpful. I love her voice. I love that she's a little bit sarcastic and biting. And I have found it to be hugely helpful. I teach it in all of my classes.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
I actually haven't read Bird by Bird. Isn't that
It's I
crazy?
yeah. Well, here we'll swap. I'll buy a copy of yours and you buy a copy of mine, and then we can talk about it.
Love it.
See, community. It's that simple.
Community.
It's literally that easy to build community. Next week, we're going to be talking about workshopping, how to run a workshop, the good, the bad, and everything in between. We're also going to get a brief summary from Maddie about her trip to AWP that I can't wait to hear about because I didn't get to go this year. So hopefully, she'll have some fun insights for us.
Yeah, hopefully it'll be a good time. Looking forward
Mhm.
to it.
I'm Abigail,
And I'm Maddie, and this has been
two writers.
Many Wrongs.